Alright, so now that we have the high poly model done, we're gonna save a copy of it. Let's call it M37 low poly. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove all these turbo smooth modifiers here, and we're gonna remove some useless loops and some extra geometry, like the grooves on the pump here are probably a bit excessive, so we'll probably remove those. But I'll decide if I'll remove them when everything else is done, and I can see the total poly count of the low poly model, because let's be honest, games nowadays like Counter-Strike Global Offensive, for instance, has models that are over 10,000 triangles. So if this is like 5K with the grooves modeled in the pump, there's really no reason to not leave them in my opinion. Anyway, but anyway, just remove all the turbo smooth modifiers you can find. Okay, that should do the trick. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but I've got the polygon counter active here, which is toggled by hitting 7, or you can go to configure viewports and statistics and show statistics in active view. And we'll want to go here anyways, because we'll want to enable triangle count instead of polygon count, because a polygon can be anything from 3 verts to 300 or upwards, and whereas the amount of triangles is always absolute and not relative to the vert count of the polygons. So let's enable that, and I'll also enable total plus selection instead of only total, so I can easily see the poly count on the selected object, and we can see that at the moment the pump accounts for like half of the triangles on this thing. So let's optimize it down a bit. I'll just what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna delete these faces here temporarily. Okay. So I can easily take ring selection, and I'll just remove the actually no, I think I'll probably leave those pump grooves on, but I'll try removing everything else quickly. And to delete edges, if you hit backspace, it only deletes the edges associated with the verts, but it still leaves the vertices here. But if you hit Control plus backspace, it also deletes the vertices associated with the edges. And that's what we want to do when optimizing stuff down. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to select the middle loops here, because it's kind of unnecessarily high poly at the moment. If I'm going to leave them on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse them into just one edge instead of two. So basically I'm undoing that chamfer I did earlier. I'll just do ring selection and hit collapse, and so you can see that saves a lot of triangles. And I'm going to remove these as well. Actually, I think I'll just remove this. Yeah, that's a little better. Though I'll probably have to optimize it a bit, but doesn't really matter. But I'm gonna delete these as well. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the bridge tool on these edges here to basically close it down a bit, and I'm gonna select these this border here, deselect these these couple of edges here, and hit bridge again. As you can see, that's a lot better. And I'll just remove some extra loops here as well. As well, and maybe that one as well. Yeah, that's anything that doesn't really affect the silhouette of the model drastically should go. As you can see, that's not a huge difference, especially from afar. And especially not from a first-person perspective. It makes absolutely almost no difference at all. The smoothing is a little worse, but the normal maps will fix the smoothing for us, so it's not a big deal. And okay, I might have to optimize this a bit still, but the pump is around 1,800 triangles at the moment. But I think I'm gonna stay well under, let's say, 8K, even if I keep the, well, as you can see, without optimizing any other parts than the pump, it's already lower poly than the default AK-47 in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and there's a lot of optimization I can do here still. So I'm just gonna leave the pump grooves on, because let's face it, it's 2012. Modern computers can handle a pretty huge amount of triangles easily. It's texture sizes that actually kills performance, and not really the high amount of triangles in game. I'm gonna delete these as well and just use the bridge trick again to get quickly rid of those insets I placed. And cap that little bit there. Same here as well. And with the low poly model, unlike the high poly model, you don't need to keep this in all in triangles. I mean, not all in quads. You can easily use triangles, but there are a couple of pointers you want to keep in mind. You'll want to avoid crazy 300-sided polygons, because when you export a model into a game engine, what basically happens is that the converter turns the model completely into triangles, because games only work with triangles. And And if you haven't manually triangulated it, the 300-sided polygon might automatically triangulate really ugly, and yeah, it's probably gonna look really bad. And it's just cleaner to work with 3- and 4-sided polygons, even with the low poly model. And the other thing you'll want to keep in mind is that long, thin triangles are also kind of bad to performance. So if I were to, let's say, if I were to place a triangle all the way here from here, well, that's still not too thin, but that's already less than optimal. So we can leave some extra geometry on to make sure the model is a bit cleaner, but you don't really want to go overboard with that either. As long as it looks and works great, doesn't really matter. A few extra triangles doesn't matter that much with PC games. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna make a couple of manual cuts here to make it into 3- and 4-sided polygons. Pretty simple. And I'm just gonna leave these couple of loops on. Not like, doesn't really make a huge difference. It's only 244 triangles at the moment for the entire receiver. And also I'm gonna keep these floaters partially here, but I'm gonna delete the outer faces, the extra outer faces. So I'll go in border mode because they're all equal, and hit select everything and hit delete, and just repeat until those extra parts have been removed, like this. And one thing I should have probably done earlier is use a slightly higher subdivision level for the floaters here, because at the moment they're 8-sided, which doesn't really look all that great compared to the relatively smooth cylinder. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna apply a turbo smooth modifier here, and I'm gonna optimize it down manually just a bit, but I'll collapse it. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut the symmetry modifier, because for some reason my Mac likes to default to editable mesh even though I want it to work with editable poly. So I'll just convert that and paste the symmetry modifier back. And now what I'm going to do is I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna select every other polygon on this loop here. And now that I hit collapse, we can see that the silhouette of the rivet hasn't changed drastically, but by doing that we removed 16 faces pretty easily, and we can repeat this for all the floaters here. I'll just remove the same edges for consistency. Okay, sorry about that, my dad called me so I had to pick up. But anyways, like I was saying, let's select every other edge here, and I'll just select the same edges for consistency's sake. And here as well. And I'll just hit collapse, and you can see it optimizes quite nicely without drastically changing the silhouette of the rivets here. Again, the smoothing is probably slightly worse, but it doesn't really matter because the normal maps will fix it. And one thing I also noticed that, well, actually I'm gonna remove these loops on top here because they're actually useless. And I'll temporarily remove this one as well. And I'm actually just gonna connect this here. That's slightly better. Model still looks exactly the same, and I'm gonna remove some extra geometry here as well. Again, I'll just use the Create Edge tool to connect these verts to make four-sided polygons. And just don't mind me, I'm just assigning some temporary smoothing groups. Well, those will actually get automatically fixed after we have UV mapped our low poly mesh, because we'll use a text tools feature that assigns smoothing groups by UV island breaks. So I'm just doing this for the hell of it. But let's continue with the optimization. I can actually remove this face completely. I'll just move it up slightly and remove these couple of extra loops here as well. Actually, I'll use the bridge trick here again. Cap those. Use it here as well. And I'm not gonna remove the entire loop, but most of it. And these two I'm gonna remove entirely, because they don't affect the silhouette of the model at all, only smoothing, which will be fixed later on. Same here as well. And I'll just connect this manually again. And on the barrel here, I'm gonna cap that temporarily, remove that edge. Or actually, I don't need to cap it at all. Just remove that edge and, well, actually I could have just like deleted the entire thing and just use the bridge trick again. And I'm gonna temporarily hide everything else to make it a little easier to work with this here. And I think I'm actually gonna delete these parts here and just use bridge. A lot easier that way than trying to remove all the edges there. As you can see, bridge is really useful, so use it whenever you can. And I'll just apply a different smoothing group. Actually, I might have to, let's select all verts and weld them. Yeah, didn't actually fix anything. Oh well. Yeah, there, that's the problem. I had angle selection on. Didn't want to select any loops with the angle selection on for some reason. Just remove this entirely. I'm actually not sure if I want to remove it entirely. Well, let's not remove it entirely, but I'll just use the bridge trick on it later again. But I'll remove these loops here first to retain some smoothness here. Okay, now I can just use bridge on these. Same here as well. And this floater here, I'm just gonna delete entirely because it's, if you can't probably even see that floater from behind the pump in first person. So, and the normal map will project it here anyways, so we don't need to leave it on in actual geometry. Let's collapse that. And okay, that's pretty ugly. Well, I'll just remove the, I'll leave the middle loop there again, and like that to retain some curvature here. But this time around I'm gonna remove the top completely. And I'm just gonna cap this temporarily. Same here as well. Actually, I'm not gonna cap it yet. Just do something like that. Actually, maybe I'll just use the loop selection. Actually, I think I'll just remove these X loops here, and I'll cap this temporarily to retain the shape, and I'll just use cap here and manually clean it up. Something like that should do the trick. And I'll just put this here because a long triangle like this might be unoptimal, and 3ds Max sometimes defaults really badly with those long triangles, so it doesn't really hurt with the low poly to keep it in more even in triangles than in quads. We just want to make sure that it looks great even when exported into a game engine. And optimizing this might be a bit difficult. I'm not entirely sure how I'm gonna optimize this, but I'm sure I'll come up with something. Yeah, that's not gonna do it. I'm wondering if I might even have to rebuild that. I'll try the optimize modifier, even though it's not always optimal, but I'll see if this could possibly fix it for me. Let's say 50. Yeah, that's bad. Oh, that's really bad. Yeah, maybe I'll just remake it. And I'll use a cube again. Turbo smooth it. I'll use just one iteration this time around. And now that I'm remaking it, yeah, I forgot the spherify modifier. That's a lot better. And convert to editable poly. Yeah, what I was saying is, especially now that I'm remaking it, I want to show it's as close as possible to the original mesh here. I think that's pretty close. And I'll just unhide that temporarily. Use the y-axis. Okay, that should do the trick. I'll just scale this down slightly. Always try to optimize down instead of having to remake stuff, because oftentimes when you're remaking stuff like this, it might end up rendering the normal maps less than optimally, so you might want to avoid it. But I think that's actually not too bad. I'll have to move these loops here slightly to make it actually look cylindrical. It was far from perfect, but this should do that trick. It's close enough. On the other hand, it's a front sight, so it's not exactly a very critical piece here. And the only thing that's left now is optimizing these. And just use the border selection, and here I'm gonna select the middle part and just use the grow button, and I'll just breach it again. Now that's pretty good. And I'll just collapse this here. Well, actually, I could probably optimize it without collapsing it first. And I'm gonna put just temporarily cap this here. Yeah, actually, wow, that's not very good. It's not completely planar for some weird reason. Oh well. Guess I'll just delete this here, or actually I'll remove these one extra loop here first, this one as well, and I'll just bridge it and bridge this here as well. Actually, I'll have to. Wow, that's weird. Let's see if the element selection works on it. It does. Okay, let's try bridging now. Yep, that did the trick. And just remove these couple of extra loops here. And apply the symmetry modifier. Actually, I'll remove this first. Oh, that's a lot better. And I'll do the same here as well. And I'll just move this slightly to follow the curvature a little better. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make some cuts here. This, let's say this part here is pretty much useless. I can remove it entirely, and I can probably make something like this as well. Yeah, definitely. Just move it slightly, and just remove this here. Might even be able to. Actually, I'll just leave it like that. That should be pretty much optimal. And I'll just collapse it down, and yeah, that's perfect. I'll just remove this one edge here. And that's pretty much the low poly. And the next thing we want to do is UV map and bake it, but I'll make that a separate video. Thanks for watching again, and I hope you enjoyed.